Story 1. The Ballad of Copperhead Hollow. The engine coughed its last metallic breath just as the tires sank past the axle in the red mud. Elias Thorne put his head against the steering wheel of the old pickup and let the silence of Copperhead Hollow swallow the ringing in his ears. He hadn't been back in 15 years, not since his grandfather died, and the air here still tasted like sulfur and pine needles, thick and unsettling. Elias was a city man now, sleek, modern, and utterly useless against the crushing, primitive indifference of these mountains. He was here because of a letter, scribbled in the jittery hand of his great-uncle Silas. Elias, come quick. The mountain's awake, and it wants the debt paid. It's the wood that breathes, boy. The wood that breathes. Don't tell nobody you're comin'. Cryptic, sure, but Silas wasn't given to theatrics. Silas was a rock of a man, hardened by a lifetime of mining coal and digging potatoes from the shallow, rocky soil. He was the last thorn left on the hollow land, a remote patch of West Virginia acreage that had been in the family since before the Civil War, bought cheap when it was nothing but dense, unyielding forest. Elias got out of the truck. The humidity hit him like a wet, dirty blanket. The canopy above was so thick it filtered the late afternoon sun into a pale, sickly green light. It was dead silent. The kind of silence that feels purposeful, not empty. There were no birdsong, no crickets, just the low, subsonic thrum of a million unseen things waiting. Silas's cabin was a half-mile walk up a deeply rutted logging path that hadn't seen a maintenance crew since the 1980s. The cabin came into view suddenly, perched precariously on a small, unnaturally flat shelf of land above a deep, shadowed creek, or crick, as Silas would have called it. It was small, made of rough-hewn timber, and looked like it had grown out of the earth rather than been built upon it. The windows were dark. The porch swing hung motionless. A rusted-out 50s Ford sat derelict beneath a sprawling black walnut tree. Everything was exactly as Elias remembered, except for the oppressive atmosphere. It felt less like a home and more like a carefully maintained ambush. Elias approached the front door. It was slightly ajar, resting on its latch. He pushed it open, the old hinges groaning a tortured, high lonesome complaint. Silas. Elias called out. His voice sounded paper-thin and weak against the interior gloom. The cabin was tidy, which was immediately wrong. Silas was meticulous in his habits but a slob in his living space. The dishes were stacked in the sink. The wood stove was cold but swept clean. The air smelled of stale coffee, tobacco, and something else, something earthy and mineral, like iron-rich soil mixed with ozone after a lightning strike. He found Silas's things laid out on the kitchen table with an unnerving sense of order. His wallet, keys, pocket knife, and reading glasses. Next to them was a worn leather-bound journal. Elias picked up the journal. The first few pages were daily entries about the weather, chores, and the price of tobacco. Then, the handwriting changed. It became larger, hurried, and interspersed with crude, frantic drawings. June 14th. Heard it again tonight. Not the wind. Not an owl. It's a rhythmic noise. A thump and a drag. Sounds like the mountain breathing with a collapsed lung. Comes from the high side, near the old shaft. June 19th. Found the blood. Not much, just a smear on the porch steps. Too thin for deer, too dark for rabbit. It felt old. Wiped it up quick. Feel like I'm bein' watched, but the only thing movin' is the leaves when there ain't no breeze. June 24th. The soil's turning. Found a patch of what looked like crystal on the west field. Not quartz. It's green and it vibrates. Dug it up and burned it, but it smelled like iron and screamed when the heat hit it. The well water tastes like rust now. I ain't drinkin' it. Got to pay the debt. The debt of the wood witch. The final entry was just a single word, scrawled so hard the pen tore through the paper. Lurid. Elias shuddered and dropped the journal onto the table. Lurid. The word felt obscene in this environment. He went to the back door, which led out to the sloping yard and the deep, dark woods beyond. His eyes adjusted to the shadows. He noticed a faint, almost invisible trail leading up the rise toward the back ridge, not a deer path, but a heavy, dragging track. He grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from the porch and started walking. The ascent was brutal. Within minutes, the cabin was swallowed by the briars and the deep undergrowth. Elias found himself enveloped by a silence even more profound than the one at the hollow entrance. The trees here were ancient, their branches so intertwined that the sky was just a memory. It felt like walking through a damp, green tunnel. The dragging track led him past an immense, moss-covered boulder, the granite cold even in the humidity. Scratched into the moss was a symbol, a crude spiral with a vertical line running through it. It was the mark of the old Thorne family, a symbol Silas had once told him represented the roots of the mountain. As he followed the mark, the air grew noticeably colder, and the earthy, mineral odor intensified. The ground began to change. Beneath the leaf litter, the soil had a pale, unnatural sheen. It was crumbly and mixed with fragments that caught the flashlight beam, not crystals, exactly, but calcified, bone-like splinters. He stopped, breathing hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wasn't looking at nature anymore. He was looking at evidence of a disease. Up ahead, a small, sagging structure appeared. It was the abandoned entrance to the Copperhead mine, the Thorne family's failed venture from the 1920s. A collapse had sealed it 20 years ago, but now, the reinforced timber frame had been ripped violently away from the opening. The entrance gaped open like a hungry mouth in the hillside. Elias crept forward, the flashlight beam cutting a shaky cone into the darkness. Just inside the shaft, he found a coil of thick, new rope, tied off to a remaining roof beam. Silas had gone down there. And then he heard it. The sound from the journal. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It wasn't a mechanical sound, and it wasn't the sound of a human working. It was heavy, wet, and deeply organic. It echoed up the shaft, vibrating in the soles of Elias's boots. It sounded like something trying to pull its own body mass across rough, wet slate, and it was coming from far, far down. Elias had an instinctual, animalistic urge to run, but his city-learned disbelief warred with the primal dread of the hollow. He had to know. For Silas. He tested the rope, found it secure, and clipped the flashlight to his belt. He started the slow, terrifying descent into the black throat of the mountain. The air in the shaft was intoxicatingly thick, cold, and charged with the smell of iron and decay. The air wasn't moving. It was still, heavy, and compressed. He could hear water dripping somewhere far away, and the close, frantic buzzing of thousands of flies. The shaft was a claustrophobic tunnel of rotten timber and slick shale. The light on his belt bobbed, casting huge, grotesque shadows that writhed and danced around him. The thump drag sound grew louder. It was punctuated now by a wet squelch. Elias reached the bottom of the rope and dropped onto the uneven, dusty mine floor. He was in the main haulage way, a narrow tunnel heading straight back into the heart of the ridge. He found Silas's old, heavy-duty mining lantern sitting on the ground. Its oil was spent. Following the sound, Elias walked deeper, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The air was getting hot now, inexplicably, stiflingly hot, and the mineral scent was so strong it tasted like old pennies. Then he rounded a bend and had to clap a hand over his mouth to stifle a scream. The tunnel opened up into a massive, natural cavern where the Thorne family had hit their first and only vein of true, high-quality coal generations ago. But the coal was gone. The cavern walls glowed with an internal, greenish-white light. The light wasn't coming from a lamp. It was coming from the walls themselves. Every surface of the cavern was coated in a dense, crystalline fungal growth, pulsing faintly with that sickening green luminescence. It looked like mineralized bone marrow, sharp and wet, growing in thick, veined lattices. This was the crystal Silas had written about. This was the bone sickness. And in the center of the cavern, where the light was brightest, was the source of the sound. It was Silas, or what the mountain had done to him. Silas was not standing, nor was he lying down. He was hunched over a low mound of mineralized earth, his body partially fused to the ground by the same glowing, parasitic growth that coated the walls. The lower half of his body was lost in the white-green matrix. His arms were splayed, and his fingers, elongated and thin, were desperately raking at the damp earth around the mound. His breathing was the source of the noise. Thump. The wet, desperate collapse of a lung. Drag. The sound of his calcified, crystalline-sheathed fingers scraping the shale. Silas's eyes were open, wide, and entirely white, filmed over with the crystal growth. He was blind, but he was utterly, terribly awake. "Uncle Silas." Elias croaked, stepping closer. Silas didn't look at him. His scraping movements didn't stop. "Silas, it's Elias. We have to get you out." Silas let out a sound. A dry, hacking rattle that Elias knew, intellectually, should be a voice. But it wasn't. It was the sound of air moving through mineral deposits. The only movement Silas made was to stop scraping, very slowly, and tilt his head toward the mound he was fused to. Dig, the sound came out. It wasn't Silas's voice. It was the cavern's voice, a chorus of whispering echoes vibrating through the crystalline growth. Dig, FF for it, the mound Silas was attached to was not earth. As Elias looked closer, he saw a network of veins in the pale growth leading into the mound. It was a heart, an immense, crystalline organ, beating slowly beneath the surface of the earth, feeding on the mineral-rich shale and the organic material it captured. Elias backed away slowly, his legs trembling. The mountain wasn't just a place. It was a hungry, geological entity. The Thornes hadn't bought the land. They had been feeding the land. The coal they mined, the timber they cut, it was all a superficial layer over the thing that truly owned Copperhead Hollow. The bone sickness was the physical manifestation of its debt collection. Silas was digging for it, serving the mountain, trying to feed the growth with whatever organic matter he could find, including, Elias realized with a sickening jolt, himself. As the realization hit, the air pressure dropped. The cavern lights intensified, and the thump drag accelerated into a manic rhythm. The growth on Silas's face seemed to shimmer. "Mine is the wood," the cavern whispered, the sound now clearer, more coherent, and laced with an unspeakable, grinding pleasure. "You are the root." Elias didn't wait for another word. He turned and sprinted back down the tunnel, scrambling past the lantern, not bothering to retrieve the rope. He clawed his way out of the mine shaft, scraping his hands raw against the jagged slate. He burst out into the late evening light, gasping the cool, clean air. He looked back at the gaping maw of the shaft, which now seemed to be exhaling the heavy, mineral stench of the cavern. He ran, stumbling down the path, tearing through briars and sliding on the slick mud. When he reached the cabin, he didn't even look inside. He grabbed the can of kerosene for the lamps, drenched the entire structure, and tossed a match over his shoulder as he reached the truck. The cabin erupted in a whoosh of orange and black smoke, purifying and destroying everything in a single, desperate blaze. Elias tried to start the truck. The engine whined, protested, and died. He tried again, turning the key until the plastic broke. He was stuck. He scrambled out, grabbing the leather journal from the floorboard. He started sprinting down the dirt road, leaving the truck, the fire, and the hollow behind him. He ran until he collapsed by the small, rusty sign that marked the boundary of the Thorne property. He finally looked back. The column of smoke was thick and black against the purple evening sky, but it was being contained. The wind was suddenly still, and the smoke was rising straight up, as if the mountain was politely allowing the cabin to burn, knowing it made no difference. Elias sat on the side of the road, tears mixing with sweat and grime, watching the fire die down. He was safe. He had escaped the mountain, the mine, and the bone sickness. But as he stared at the dying embers, he noticed the ground beneath his feet. The loose, rocky soil of the roadside had a pale, unnatural sheen. And scattered among the pebbles and dirt, like misplaced teeth, were tiny, white, calcified splinters. Bone fragments. He looked down at his scraped hands. His blood was drying in the cuts, mixing with the dust. He could feel the familiar, comforting thump-drag echo in the hollow space between the mountain's ridges. It wasn't Silas digging. It wasn't a cavern. The mountain was listening. And now, the root had been replanted. Elias Thorne looked down at his left index finger. A pale, needle-thin sliver of the green-white crystalline growth was already beginning to emerge from beneath the nail. He had paid the mountain's price. And the wood that breathed had finally come with him. Story 2. The abyssal chorus descent into silence. The submersible, Triton 3, was less a vessel and more a pressurized coffin for 3. Its titanium shell groaned in protest, a sound swallowed instantly by the crushing weight of the Pacific. Outside the viewport, the world was a black, lightless void, interrupted only by the bioluminescent algae trails kicked up by the descent. Dr. Alara Vance, chief xenopaleontologist, gripped the control stick until her knuckles went white. Beside her, Captain Reese Kalin, an ex-Navy deep salvage specialist, watched the altimeter with the detached concentration of a man who had long ago run out of things to be afraid of. Behind them, strapped into the cramped observer seat, was junior technician Leo Chen, whose only contribution so far had been nervous, shallow breathing. Depth check, Alara said, her voice dry, static laced through the comms. 13,000 meters and holding, Reese replied. His voice was a calm, low counterpoint to the substructural noises. Welcome to the Challenger Deep, Doctor. You can practically taste the crushing pressure. They were miles past the furthest reach of the sun, deep within the Mariana Trench. They weren't looking for hydrothermal vents or new species of anglerfish. They were hunting a signal, a steady, non-random magnetic pulse that had been detected over 2 years by the Scorpion Array, a research station anchored 500 meters above the trench floor. The signal was impossible, structured, repeating, and entirely isolated from any known seismic or human activity. Dropping the passive sonar now, Captain, Leo whispered, his voice trembling slightly. The hydrophones deployed, sinking into the abyssal silence. For a moment, there was nothing but the Triton III's own hum. Then, the signal hit. It wasn't just a pulse, it was a noise. A sound that shouldn't exist in water that cold and that dense. It was a rhythmic, low-frequency hum, layered with something higher, like the scraping of immense geological plates, yet maintaining a distinct, harmonic structure. It was a song. Reese adjusted the ballast. Signals coming from dead ahead, Alara. Right in the basin center. You sure about this location? It's the only place the data converges, Alara confirmed, leaning into the viewport. It was logged as a single, stationary point of origin. We should be seeing the target. Reese cut the floodlights, plunging the cabin into blackness. Hold tight. He brought the lights back up, focusing the Triton's forward array on a point 70 meters away. Leo sucked in a sharp breath. It wasn't geological. It wasn't natural. Rising from the trench floor was a structure that defied context. It was impossibly huge, a vast, smooth obsidian cylinder that appeared to be growing out of the crust itself. Its surface wasn't rock. It was some kind of highly polished, matte black mineral that didn't reflect light so much as absorb it and warp it. Where the edges of the cylinder met the sediment, they were perfectly crisp, as if sliced by a cosmic razor blade. Christ, Reese breathed, the first hint of genuine unease in his voice. That's not a vent. It's a needle, Alara murmured, her eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of professional awe and dawning dread. It goes down further than the seismic imaging showed. And look at the composition. It's a monocrystalline extrusive structure. Artificial. The structure and the scars. Alara navigated the Triton III slowly toward the base of the cylinder. As they drew closer, the magnetic pulse intensified, setting the sub's internal instruments vibrating. The harmonic humming they'd heard now resonated through their very bones. "We are in the signal's pocket, people," Reese stated. "Leo, get the spectral analysis running." "Alara, what is that texture?" The surface of the obsidian cylinder wasn't smooth, Alara realized. It was covered in subtle, raised patterns, etchings, not unlike hieroglyphs, but impossibly sharp and alien. They looked less carved and more extruded from the material itself, as if the structure had grown its own language. Alara brought the manipulator arm close and took a core sample, the diamond drill shrieking against the material. The sample capsule retracted with a thunk. "Analysis complete," Leo reported, his voice now high-pitched with suppressed hysteria. "The material, it doesn't match anything in the geological database. It's silicon, oxygen, and carbon, but the lattice structure is impossibly dense. It's over 6 billion years old, Doctor. That's older than the Earth." Reese swallowed hard. 6 billion years. So it was here before the planet formed. Just waiting. Alara didn't answer. She was focused on the base of the cylinder. Around its periphery, the trench floor was not uniform sediment. It was a field of scars. Deep, radial fissures cut into the crust, extending outward like dried, ancient wounds. "The trenches aren't natural rifts here," Alara explained, her voice regaining its scientific urgency, battling the fear. "They're stress fractures. This thing, it wasn't just put here. It was shoved here. It cracked the planetary crust." The humming from the structure suddenly became irregular. The rhythmic harmony fractured into sharp, discordant chords. "What was that?" Reese demanded. "It's not random," Alara snapped, staring at the sonar display. "It just changed its note. It's reacting to our presence. It's communicating." The communication was followed by a change in the environment. A cloud of fine, black, metallic sediment began to plume from the largest stress fissure, swirling around the base of the obsidian cylinder like a dark halo. "That's not water," Reese warned. "That's a ferrous fluid. Heavy metals." The translator as the cloud thickened, obscuring the structure's base, a small, dark object detached itself from the cylinder and drifted toward the Triton III. It was no more than a meter in diameter, perfectly spherical, and covered in the same extruded language as the main structure. It wasn't moving under its own power. It seemed to be propelled by an invisible, local current created by the structure itself. "Don't touch it, Reese," Alara yelled. "Too late, Doctor. It's almost on us." The sphere bumped softly against the Triton's hull, right near the sensor array. A brilliant flash of emerald green light erupted from the sphere, hitting the sub's titanium shell. The impact wasn't physical, it was a catastrophic data spike. All the monitors in the Triton III flickered violently, then went blank. "Power failure," Reese barked, struggling with the controls. were running on backup life support. Sonar, comms, main thrusters, all dark. It didn't fry them, Alara whispered, staring wide-eyed at the dark screens. It overwrote them. Look at the spectral display, Leo, if you can get it back up. Leo, shaking, managed to reboot the auxiliary monitor. The spectral graph reappeared, but it was no longer displaying simple frequency. It displayed a massive, intricate sequence of data, pure, untranslated code. It put its language into our machine, Alara realized. It's using the sub as a translator. The code pulsed, and then, slowly, a simple sentence scrolled across the screen in perfect, unaccented English. You bring the light. This is forgiven. Reese stared. Forgiven. What the hell does that mean? Before anyone could speculate, the screen changed. The English text was replaced by a dizzying cascade of images, sounds, and sensation data transmitted directly into the Triton systems. They saw, or felt, the birth of the structure. It was an impossible journey across the void of space, not in a ship, but as a seed of pure mineral intelligence, traveling between galaxies where the laws of physics were different. It landed, crashing into the nascent Earth, creating the deep scar of the trench. It was a prison, placed here by something else, something vast and cold. It had been sealed for billions of years, waiting for the geological life cycle to bring organic material, fuel, close enough to break its seal. The video feed stopped on a sudden, horrifying image. A group of early hominids, gathering shellfish near a shallow volcanic vent, the ancestors of humanity. They were not seen as individuals, but as biological energy, as biomass. The accompanying text flashed. The fuel has been sufficient. The gate is unlocked. The wood witch's death. The structure's humming stopped instantly. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. Reese, we need to get out of here. Now, Alara screamed, fighting the paralysis of terror. Reese was already wrestling with the manual controls, trying to eject the emergency ballast. No power. The circuits are cold. The pressure differential is too great to try manual overrides. Leo, his head resting against the viewport glass, suddenly began to whimper. The sphere. It's changing. The small black orb that had attached itself to the hull was no longer smooth. The extruded language on its surface was melting, running like black ink, and reforming into complex, mobile shapes. The sphere was undergoing a transformation, shedding its crystalline shell to reveal the organic core beneath. The core was a writhing mass of slender, bone-white fibers, each tipped with a minuscule, razor-sharp hook. It resembled a grotesque, deep-sea tumbleweed, pulsating with an internal, sickly violet light. Alara recognized the fibers immediately from an image in the coded transmission. They were the feeding tendrils. The organism was not the obsidian structure, the structure was merely the shell and the signal. The life was inside. And it was trying to get in. One of the white tendrils extended rapidly, tapping lightly against the viewport. It didn't crack the glass, but the sound resonated in the cabin, an agonizing high-pitched ping. Reese, the lights. Turn them off. The transmission said they brought the light. Alara yelled, scrambling for the auxiliary light switch. Reese slammed the switch, but nothing happened. Locked out. The system is still running that program, whatever it is. On the auxiliary monitor, the text changed again. We are the seed. You are the soil. The pulsing violet mass outside began to exert pressure. The Triton's titanium hull started to whine, not from external water pressure, but from the localized, focused leverage of the countless fibers pressing against the weak points. The hatches, the sensor ports, the small gap where the diamond drill had taken the core sample. Leo began to hyperventilate. I hear it. I hear the chorus. Alara, it's inside my head. Reese slammed his fist against the control panel. Snap out of it, Chen. Fight the panic. But Leo was gone, his eyes glazed over, staring blankly ahead. He opened his mouth and began to produce a sound. Not a scream, but a perfect, high-frequency harmonic hum, echoing the signal they had first heard. It was the deepest note of the abyssal chorus, delivered through a human throat. The sound acted like a key. Where the core sample had been taken, the titanium had been fractionally weakened. A thin, hair-like tendril of the violet organism slipped through the microscopic gap, threading itself into the pressurized cabin. It was impossibly fast. It darted across the cabin floor, moving like a snake, and lashed onto Leo Chen's neck. Leo convulsed, his harmonic humming turning into a choked gurgle. The violet light in the tendril intensified, and Leo's skin, where the fiber touched it, instantaneously turned a sickly, dark obsidian color, like polished coal. In less than 3 seconds, Leo Chen's body went rigid. The tendril retreated, leaving behind a small, perfectly round, obsidian scar where it had entered. Leo was dead, but not merely dead. His body had been mineralized. Reese, reacting instantly, tore his fire extinguisher from its mounting and sprayed the freezing chemical foam at the retreating fiber. The tendril shrieked, a high, piercing sound that cut through the sub's thick walls, and retracted violently back into the external sphere. It doesn't like the cold. Reese shouted, his face pale with shock. Alara's mind raced, struggling to maintain scientific observation in the face of absolute horror. It's a thermal siphon. It wants the warmth, the organic heat. Reese aimed the extinguisher at the sphere on the hull and emptied the canister. The cold jet hissed, momentarily clouding the viewport. The sphere shrieked again and detached itself, sinking slowly back toward the glowing base of the impossible structure. It's not over, Alara said, pointing at the monitor. The screen still pulsed with the code, and now, a final, horrifying instruction was displayed. The vessel has been sanitized. Ascend, and share the chorus. The ascent. The Triton's internal systems flickered back to life. The main thrusters roared. The forward floodlights clicked on. It unlocked as Reese realized, his voice hollow. It doesn't want us dead here. It wants us to take the seed back up. He looked at Leo's mineralized corpse, then at the still pulsing monitor. Where is the seed? Alara pointed to the core sample capsule. It was nestled in its holder, untouched by the organism outside. It's not outside. It injected something when it hit the hull. It injected its structure into the core sample we took, the impossibly dense mineral. That capsule is carrying a bio-mineralized egg. Reese didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy-duty wrench and brought it down hard on the core sample cradle. The metal warped, but the capsule, made of reinforced steel, would not open. We can't destroy it here, Reese. It will just activate. Then we jettison the entire arm. Reese started frantically flipping switches, initiating the emergency purge sequence for the manipulator arm. The cabin was filled with the sounds of grinding servos and straining cables. Clang. The manipulator arm was gone, sinking back toward the abyssal plane, taking the small, ominous capsule with it. Reese activated the ascent thrusters. The Triton 3 shot upward, finally free of the magnetic pull of the alien needle. As they rose, Alara looked back at the obsidian structure through the main viewport. It was glowing now, brighter than before, the green-white light of the cavern they hadn't entered pulsing rapidly, like a heart contracting. The abyssal chorus began again, but this time, it was louder, stronger, and accompanied by the sound of immense, grinding, geological movement. The radial fissures Alara had noticed were widening. The structure was rising. It's not a prison, Reese, Alara whispered, watching the massive cylindrical shape grow smaller but brighter below them. It's an anchor. We broke the planetary crust. We activated the debt payment. It's going to surface. Reese didn't reply. He was focused on the speed gauges. We've got a long climb, Doctor. We have to outrun the pressure wake. They spent the next 4 hours in agonizing ascent, listening to the deep, resonant thrum of the structure rising far beneath them. The sound was no longer just the sub's internal static. It was the noise of the Earth's armor cracking open. They finally breached the surface at dawn, not to the welcoming arms of the research vessel Athelred, but to a gray, heavy fog and an endless, choppy sea. The Athelred was nowhere in sight. Athelred, Triton 3 calling. Do you read, Athelred? Where are you? Reese shouted into the newly functional radio. Static. Only the static, and the cold, vast sound of the ocean. Then, a faint, metallic groan on the far horizon. A dark shape bobbed into view through the fog. The Athelred, but it was listing heavily, its superstructure twisted and sheared away. They didn't make it, Alara realized. The pressure wave, the tremor. Reese maneuvered the Triton 3 slowly toward the wrecked vessel. It was an apocalyptic sight. Steel twisted like ribbon candy, massive winches snapped clean off. The main deck was covered in a thick, fine, black powder, the ferrous fluid they had seen pluming from the trench floor. They found no survivors. Reese docked the Triton 3 in the Athelred's half-sunken bay and climbed out onto the slick, metallic deck. Alara followed, her feet crunching on the black powder. Where did it go? Alara asked, her eyes scanning the fog-shrouded, empty sea. The structure is gone, or it's still rising, but something else did this, Reese said, pointing a shuddering finger at the railing. Embedded deep in the steel, everywhere they looked, were small, perfectly round obsidian scars, identical to the one left on Liu Chen's neck. The scars were not from shrapnel. They were from focused, penetrating impacts. Then Reese pointed to the research vessel's main deck hatch. It had been sealed, but now, a thick, green-white crystalline growth was spreading rapidly across the steel door, fracturing the metal. It was the bone sickness, but it was growing faster, consuming the organic paint and the carbon in the metal itself. The abyssal chorus was fading, but in its place, a new sound emerged, the soft, wet squelch of something moving slowly beneath the main deck. The seed we jettisoned didn't stay down, Alara whispered, staring at the crystalline growth on the hatch. It's already found its fuel. Reese grabbed Alara's arm and pulled her toward a small, emergency zodiac raft, stowed near the bow. It knows we know, Reese muttered. It let us out because it wants witnesses, or it wants to collect the last 2 pieces of organic material it set free. They threw the raft into the gray water and scrambled in, Reese frantically rowing away from the sinking bulk of the Athelred. They rowed until the wrecked vessel was just a dark shadow in the fog. They stopped, exhausted, adrift on the vast, indifferent ocean. The crystalline growth on the Athelred was now spreading up the antenna, glowing an intense, hypnotic green-white. The entire ship was being consumed, turned into an immobile, mineral lighthouse. The final sound came not from the ship, but from the water directly beneath their rubber raft. A high-frequency thump drag, like immense, newly formed tectonic plates shifting. The sound created violent, localized turbulence, nearly flipping their tiny boat. Alara looked down into the black water. The surface was roiling, agitated by a massive, unseen displacement. The abyssal chorus had found its ultimate stage. As the sun struggled to break through the fog, Alara could see the shadow of the structure, or the structure's architect, just beneath the surface, impossibly vast, a darkness that inhaled all light. It was coming up, carrying the deep-sea plague of the bone sickness to the surface world. Reese looked at the obsidian scar on his forearm, received when he had slammed the wrench against the core capsule. He didn't speak. Alara looked at the immense shadow beneath them and at the final, luminous message left by the mineral organism on the Athelred's failing communication screen, now scrolling like a horrifying banner across the sea. The debt of the light has been paid. Welcome to the new dawn. The abyssal chorus was gone, replaced by the sound of the ocean, which, for the first time, sounded less like a place of water and more like a tomb. The Triton III was destroyed. Leo Chen was mineralized. The Athelred was a crystalline lighthouse. Elias Thorne and Alara Vance were adrift, carrying the mark of the deep. The seed was planted. The wood witch had claimed the sea. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.